Okay, so this is the second step in the getting started process. We're going to set up session log settings. So these are the settings that are needed to be set before instructors can log sessions that then are reported to administrators or emailed to parents. Okay, to do this, we're going to go to the Admin tab. Now, I suggest that you actually have your center open, your account opened, and you kind of follow along and go ahead and make a couple of these settings work with your system as you're viewing this. And you can, of course, pause, go ahead and do some of the things, and then come back and watch the next part. I think that that's probably a pretty good way to make use of this video. Okay, so to do the session log settings, we're going to go to Admin tab, and then Session Setup is the sub tab, and then now we have subjects, attendance, ratings, and session types. We're not going to deal with ratings right now. We're going to take a look at subjects, attendance, and session type. These are pretty straightforward. When we're at the subject sub tab, you can see that we have a number of subjects already created here. I can just add a new one, put a name for that subject. Let's say if it was history. And then I can choose whether this is selectable or not. Now, of course, if this is a new subject, I'm going to have it be selectable. But in the future, if I decide I no longer need this subject, rather than deleting this as one of our options, I would just make it, I would uncheck the selectable checkbox. That would make it so it doesn't show up in the list when instructors are logging sessions. That's a better process than deleting it, because past session logs might be using that subject. We wouldn't want to delete that. That would what we call in data an orphan, and that is it would have a related record that no longer exists. So if we're not going to use this as a subject anymore, we would just come in here and edit it and then deselect it. Okay, we've got enough subjects in here already. We already had one for history, so I'm not going to save that. This signifies whether it's selectable or not. And of course, to edit it, I would just use this over here. Now notice that this one says delete. That's because we've never used this one for geometry yet. So if it's never been used before, we can go ahead and delete it. If it says in use and we no longer want to have it used, I would just go to the edit again, uncheck it, save it, and now it still shows up in the list, but it's no longer selectable. Okay, so that's an important concept. It's going to show up throughout the system, and that's how you're going to handle things that you no longer want to use. If they have been used in the system previously, you won't be able to delete them, but you can make them unselected. All right, so attendance is similar as our subjects, but there's this one additional thing that we need to add when we're defining our attendance. So if we talk about, let's say, present, we need to say to the system that this means that they've attended the session. Or if it was they're late, not late, they late cancel. So maybe cancel is the name, and that means that they were a late cancel. That is, I just didn't, we're going to be charging them something. We need to signify that that was a late cancel. So just make sure that you have the appropriate field. If it's an absent, then what we would do is have neither of these selected. All right, same thing applies with the selectable checkbox here. All right, so next thing we're going to take a look at is the session types. So session types are the billable events, the things that we're charging our clients for. So we have a lot of them already created here. So a private session type, in-home, SAT, or SAT group. So this is your kind of inventory. These are the things that you charge parents for. So let's go ahead and take a look at adding a new one, because there's a number of fields in here that are important. So we, of course, give it a name. So let's make this private tutoring. Now the client note template, this is a note that you can fill out, and when the instructor selects this session type, this client note template will pop up into the client note, and it might be a good way to give direction to your instructor, to have them focus on certain things, or maybe that there's a template that you want to follow. There's certain things like a score for the session or something else. So this is information that will pop up by default in that session log, and if you have nothing there, of course, that's okay. Selectable, we've already talked about that in the past. Listen, right now default just means if you click on this, that means that this will be the session type that appears whenever a session is created. I don't suggest that you use that because I think it's important that the instructor consciously selects a session type. We're going to talk a little bit later about how you can attach a particular session type to a student so that the instructor can only select that session type related to that student. We'll get back to that later. Okay, so now down here we have the rate. So this is the rate for the session. Let's say that this is a $60 session. Now these QB fields, these are all QB fields that are related to QuickBooks exporting. There's another video that deals with QuickBooks exporting, so you can kind of skip that for now. If you're not using QuickBooks, you will not have to use these. You won't have to fill them out. And if you are using QuickBooks, make sure you watch that other QuickBooks video. Now we also have use cancel. So this means that if you're using a default rate and none of these, use cancel or use absent, none of these other rates will be used. It will always charge the client if a session is logged this $60 rate. But if you have a different rate for a late cancellation, then let's say that we're going to charge $45 for late cancellation, and for absent we're going to charge them, say, $50. Oftentimes centers will charge the same amount if they're absent as if they were present, but this just gives you some flexibility in how you're going to charge for your services based on attendance. Once again, these are also QuickBooks fields here that you won't have to worry about unless you're setting up QuickBooks, and again we'll cover that in the QuickBooks video. So we have just a review here. We have for each session type, in this case private tutoring, we have the option of creating up to 3 different rates based on attendance, and if we're just going to charge one rate, we can just use that first rate of 60, and then it'll just use that by default, and then we can use these other rates based on attendance if we want. Alright, so that is session types. So those are the 3 things that we need to set up for the sessions. I want to cover one additional thing which I mentioned earlier, which is how do I attach a particular session type to a student, and what's the value in doing that? So let's go ahead and take a look at the People tab. So you probably already have, it would be good to go ahead and create a test student so you can kind of play around with that. So I'm going to go ahead and look at this test student's account here, and under session types, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this student is supposed to receive private tutoring sessions, but there's all these different session types that could be assigned, but I'm going to go ahead and put in private here. Now when I do that, there's 2 things that can happen. One is that the instructor, when they log a session, they won't have, for this student, if they choose this student, they won't have all of the other session types. So it will eliminate errors by instructors selecting the wrong session type, because just private session type is going to show up for this student. If there was multiple, if they were doing private and SAT prep, then there'd be 2 of them. But again, much smaller list if there's multiple session types associated with that student, much less likely for to make errors. Alright, but we also have these override rates. So there's a default rate that's associated with the private session, say $60. But if we have a different deal set up with this parent, we can charge them, let's say $55 as an override. And then I can also override the late cancellation and also override the absent rate. So again, this gives you a lot of granular ability to customize and the system and create some rates that are very specific to individual students. So that is the session setup. What I want you to do is, as always, use the feedback, report a bug link at the top. If you have questions about any of the things that we've covered in the video here, ask your question. We'll get back to you very quickly, and then also we'll use that information to improve our help videos in the future.